Rabbit-Proof Fence, the 2002 film that was based on a true story of 3 mixed-race Aboriginal girls in 1930s Australia. Sisters Molly and Daisy and their cousin Gracie tells a story about them living happily with their mothers in the dry brush outback of Western Australia's Jigalong. Their mothers are careful to keep them hidden from government officials when they come around, because at that time, Australia's Aboriginal Act had a policy of kidnapping mixed-race children to be trained to serve as indentured servants to white people. And while they were happily living a traditional life for many years, and their mothers kept them away from these government officials, one traumatic day, the government kidnapper caught them and stole the 3 screaming girls from their mother's arms, pushing them into a black government car and taking them thousands of miles away to the Moore River Native settlement camp. Now that camp was awful, with rotten food and long hours of forced labor and beatings as punishment. But Molly, the oldest girl at 14, did her best to protect the younger Gracie, who was 10, and Daisy, who was 8, from abuse and neglect. And Molly was a creative, imaginative girl who came up with a plan to escape. And when she saw rain clouds in the sky that would wash their tracks away, she convinced Gracie and Daisy to run. Molly knew she must get the girls somehow back to their home over 1,500 miles away on the other side of Australia. So the 3 girls, ages 14, 10, and 8, set out into the dry and dusty 1930s Western Australian outback with no friends, no food, and no money. In the magical land of imagining, I love an epic adventure story. That hero's journey home, twisting and turning, monster-filled, realizing your purpose and fighting Cyclops and Sea Monster. In my mind, I'm some sort of swashbuckling pirate on an odyssey, swinging through the air, brandishing a sword and saving the day, all before bedtime. But in real life, epic adventures are usually not that fun. The safety of our couches makes monsters seem exciting rather than death-dealing, and rescues seem fated rather than hard-wrought. Epic adventures in real life include loss and fear and trauma, and sometimes afterward, post-traumatic stress. The risks feel a lot more frightening, the monsters a lot more awful when the consequences are real. For Molly and Daisy and Gracie, the consequences of their adventure are losing everything. Losing their home and their mothers, losing their identities and language and way of life, maybe even losing each other. And the monsters are not shapeless, dark creatures, but rather they are real, live men who think that serving and protecting Australian whiteness is more important than those little girls' lives. Not only do those monsters steal them from their homes and take them into servitude, but they chase them when the girls escape. They pay an indigenous tracker to hunt the 3 little girls for hundreds of miles. But creative and clever 14-year-old Molly remembered another story of protection. 20 years before, government men had started living in their town because the government was building a rabbit-proof fence to protect white settlements from rabbits. Now, rabbits are also very clever, and they will just go around a regular fence. So the government built a rabbit-proof fence that ran the length of the continent. Almost 2,000 miles of fence. And one leg of that fence ran near the River Mourne native settlement, and another leg of that fence pointed back home to Jigalong. Molly knew that if she could find the fence, they could walk it all the way home. On a hero's journey, a powerful sense of purpose guides through mountains and valleys, monsters and losses. Purpose overrides fear, drives through obstacles and setbacks. The purpose of getting home. The purpose of destroying the ring and saving the Shire. The purpose of defeating Lord Voldemort. Of defeating the Death Star. In real life, we have the guiding purposes of things like defeating the Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility. Of stopping We Energies from increasing the amount of mercury they release into Lake Michigan. And defeating that shapeless, dark monster of white nationalism. Each purpose has 1,000 different possible tactics pointing us in different directions and crooked lines, but the purpose can keep us holding true while the ways that we might achieve it change. And each purpose is nested inside a bigger and even more true purpose. Princess Leia and the Rebel Alliance want to defeat the Death Star, but ultimately what they want is goodness and truth to rule in the universe. Defeating the Death Star and Darth Vader is just one way to achieve that. But other ways will arise, as we know. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold tight to the purposes that are embedded in our principles. When we know that everyone is inherently worthy and that we are all connected, we're called to act in ways that realize those truths in the real world. First Church's purpose is our mission as a congregation, nurturing spirits, engaging minds, inspiring actions. And then, nested within that purpose, we have our ends, which are the specific ways we're going to try to realize that purpose right now. But there's more than one answer to how we will achieve those purposes. We know we want to head towards more authentic connections between people of different races and ages and ethnicities, but there are a lot of different ways that we could achieve that. We know we want to follow the leadership of people directly affected by injustice, but we don't necessarily know what form that will take because it's based in relationships that are still being built and then following those relationships wherever they might lead. When we set the intention, when we say our purpose will guide us, we don't necessarily know what will happen next, what the budding relationships will ask of us, or what the world's needs will demand. 10 days ago, on Friday, March 15th, the world experienced yet another white nationalist terrorist attack, this time at a mosque in New Zealand. A white man intent on doing harm in the name of white supremacy wanted to make Muslim communities afraid. afraid to go to prayer, afraid to gather together for worship, to be with one another in sacred space. And indeed, that afternoon, the New Zealand government issued a warning for people to stay away from mosques while they tried to assess the breadth of the threat. And even though they caught the terrorist that Friday, people were still afraid to return to worship the following week. So for Friday, March 22nd services at New Zealand mosques, New Zealand biker gangs stood outside during prayer. The president of the Waikato mongrel mob, Sonny Fatu, said that someone called his biker gang and told them that their local Muslim community was afraid to go to Friday's worship, and invited the biker gang to be part of the safety net for that community to be able to pray in peace without fear. Sonny took that call and he said, "Yes, we will come." In fact, he said it was without question that they would be part of that safety net. They agreed to go unarmed and peacefully secure the inner gate of the mosque so that the Muslim community could be at worship together and feel at ease. "This is what we were asked to do," Fatu said, "and so this is what we will do." The Waikato Muslim Association's leader, Dr. Asad Mohsen, said the support gave the Muslim community the strength to overcome the grief that they were undergoing. He also welcomed the bikers to come into the mosque and pray with them, saying, "They are a part of us and we are a part of them." Here in Milwaukee, last week, the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee put out the call for clergy who wanted to give their condolences and express their support for the local Muslim community to come to prayer at the Islamic Society of Milwaukee. And then this past Thursday, on March 21st, many of our community leaders and clergy and people of faith went to a vigil for the New Zealand victims and to stand united against hate with our local Muslim community. Their community leaders and people of faith reflected and held space for grief and prayed for a better future. The Islamic Society of Milwaukee's Ahmed Qureshi expressed gratitude for the difference that the Interfaith Conference continues to make for the greater Milwaukee Muslim community. And he said that the vigil allowed people to come together and stand up for love, understanding, and the truth that we are all siblings in humanity. It matters when we show up for one another. It matters when we show up after disaster, crisis, after serious violence. But it was the work and the relationships that happened for years before the disaster, before the violence, that enabled the moment of showing up. It's easy to see people standing on podiums giving speeches, or to see bikers standing outside a mosque offering a peaceful security presence, and not to see the years of relationship building that went into those moments of someone being able to make a call and say, "Will you come?" You don't see the years of trust that went into making that call possible and making the answer possible. Yes, I will come. We don't know what each day will bring. We don't know what this world will demand of us. There are so many paths moving out from each dawn's possibility. And so we must ground ourselves in our purpose. We must ground ourselves in real relationships of trust that will enable us to show up and respond to whatever the day brings. We must keep going out into an uncertain world, one that contains adventure, risk, real monsters, and let ourselves be guided by purpose. We must put that purpose to work on each day's new question, responding to whatever is happening in the world right now, while also doing the daily, long, slow, intentional work of building real relationships of trust. We create those bonds of trust and love so that we can rely on them in the moment of crisis. We combine a steady plan, follow the rabbit-proof fence for 1,500 miles, with the circles and the dodges that we have to create to respond to every new day's dawning. Because I promise you, monsters are creative too. Those monsters that are shapeless or shape-shifting will create and generate new plans of their own, and so we have to be able to both have a plan and respond to what's happening. 14-year-old Molly set her intention. She knew her purpose: get home. And then she developed a strategies using one of the monster's own tools, the rabbit-proof fence. And she and Daisy and Gracie set out to walk that fence for 1,500 miles. But even with a determined purpose and a steady fence line, their journey still experienced unexpected twists and turns. They had to dodge the grown men hunting them, who figured out that they were following the fence. So they wound out and around, they hid and came back. They circled for food and water. They both had to follow the fence and to make their following unpredictable enough to elude their captors. And finally, after 9 weeks of walking, after going for over 1,500 miles through the outback, after hiding from the adult men hunting them and finding food and water without getting caught, 14-year-old Molly and 8-year-old Daisy made it home to Jigalong. They made it home to their mothers, to safety, to their lives. But they also lost Gracie along the way. She got captured by one of the monsters and they never saw her again. Because this is based on a real story, there's no neat and tidy ending with no consequences and no loss. It's not just an epic adventure of excitement. In real life, monsters mean trauma, loss, lives forever changed. And yet, love calls us to make faithful risks anyway. Love calls us to go for escape and make it home anyway. Love calls us, even if you don't know what to do next, even if it's really, really scary, to keep loving each other through the fear, to walk out into the unknown even when it's dangerous. Love calls us to risk helping someone hide from monsters, to stand unarmed in front of our neighbor's house of worship when it is truly under threat. Love calls us to take faithful risks in the real life adventure where there are consequences. In order to do this, we have to let go of control. of knowing exactly what will happen or what to do next, and let ourselves be guided by purpose and love. And the truth is, in real life, it might not all be okay. But if we stay grounded in what matters, if we stay true to purpose and to love, then we will retain our humanity along the dangerous journey. And with our hearts in that place, while it might not be okay, it will be closer to fine. Rebecca Solnit wrote that the opposite logic of white supremacy is the understanding that we are all connected, that we are all in this together. We counter the framework of violent separation with the intentional webbing of interconnection. And when someone rips the web, we sew it back together again, building relationships and communities with stitching that is stronger than violence. To do this well, we have to keep building relationship, keep coming back to purpose, keep listening, keep reflecting on our own roles and intentions. Relationships take long-term, intentional, invested heart and soul work. But they are what is needed to face the real life epic adventures. There is real risk in this world. There's real risk in justice work, real risk in relationship, real risk in walking 1,500 miles through the desert, guided only by love. And yet, our purpose calls us to take long-term, faithful risks, grounded in interdependence. Our faith calls us to follow our purpose in all of its crooked lines back to the home of love. May it be so.